Using the weather forecast and the tide times, I took myself to Banksia Beach on Bribie Island around evening time with my Canon R5. The weather was a little bit volatile, threatening rain and storms, but that's what encouraged me to go. Quite often, just around sunset, this is when we can see those special times with changing light. This camera inspires, but when you attach the Canon RF 15 to 35mm lens and add in my knowledge of Photoshop and image editing, I really can't fail. Not unless the weather really turns featureless blanket grey. Well, it wasn't as stunning as I'd hoped, but it wasn't blanket grey either. Now, I love the angle of view of this particular lens, especially at 15mm. Placing the camera on a tripod low down to the ground, that flip-out screen that I can rotate to face me is a very comfortable way of working, especially when you're working from the wet beach sand. I set up a 3-stop bracketed exposure with a 2-second delay. And I also turned on the touch shutter. Now, foreground interest is always going to be important to create depth in our picture. With this low angle and the lens set to that 15mm, we can quite easily achieve that. Composing the shot carefully using the rule of thirds grid, all I now need to do is touch that flip out screen where I want the lens to focus. About a third of the way into the scene does it for me. The lens will snap into focus and 2 seconds later the camera automatically fires off my 3 bracketed exposures. Is bracketing exposures essential in these conditions? No, not really. I do it though so I can quickly move to other locations to vary my shots. Remember that around sunset, although we didn't see very much evidence of that this particular evening, we don't always have heaps of time, and this way of working is fast and efficient. It does allow a greater variety of images to be shot in as short a time as possible. Plus, at any time, the rain can stop play, as it did just around sunset time. Now, I've shown you 8 images here throughout this video, but really there's 2 that were stronger than the others, and this one is my favourite. Let's go through the image editing here. We start with the global editing. Colour balance first to deal with the blue cast of the evening light, mainly on the temperature slider. Dropping highlights and also opening up those shadows is next. That demands a little more contrast, and we can increase that by spreading the blacks and the white sliders apart. Keeping an eye on the clipping warnings in the histogram, of course. Make sure we don't burn anything out or block any shadows up. A little tweak of the texture slider given the texture in the foreground sand. Some clarity for mid-tone contrast, and even a little dehaze to taste. Ending the global editing with a little more vibrancy. Now we turn to strategic editing, and that's all done with masks which I've already created. So what I'd like to do here is to turn them on one at a time, and we'll talk through the results. I started by selecting a sky mask, and I've darkened the sky, but I've also addressed that colour cast as well. The next thing was to deal with a couple of little highlights in the sky, and I just used a brush for that. Then I wanted a bit more darkening at the top of the sky, so I used a gradient mask. You can see it's just dropped it a little bit. Then I did the left-hand side in exactly the same way with a gradient mask, and the right-hand side also. The bottom of the sand, again, just a little bit of darkening, and I wanted to do a little bit more right at the extreme top of the sky. And there we have the image complete. With the image opened up into Photoshop, I've adjusted the colour and a tiny bit of contrast to taste. With this image, I took a slightly different tack with the editing. I made a bit more of the warm colours, but when I got down to the clarity in Adobe Camera Raw, I removed some. Thanks for watching.